4:36 p.m., San Antonio, Texas. The grocery store lights were too bright. "Ma'am, your card has been declined." The cashier didn't say it loudly, but the scanner's beep had already turned heads. A line formed behind me with the quiet impatience of late afternoon carts bumping lightly, plastic bags rustling, someone's phone chiming a message they didn't check. The air smelled of warm bread and floor cleaner, and the cold from the freezer aisle still clung to my sleeves. I blinked once and offered a small smile, the kind you use when you don't want your face to confess anything. "Could you try it again?" I asked steady. My hands didn't shake. I've lived long enough to know panic only makes people stare harder. She tried. The machine chirped, declined again. A woman behind me sighed. Someone muttered, "Is the register down?" Another voice, softer, said, "Maybe it's fraud." The word fraud landed like heat on my neck. I felt my cheeks warm, not with guilt, but with the sudden humiliation of being treated like a problem in public. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, reaching for my wallet. I could pay another way, but that wasn't the point. This shouldn't be happening, I thought. My card had worked that morning. My accounts were in order. I kept them that way. I stepped aside, letting the next customer move forward, and pulled out my phone. No alerts, no warnings, no messages, just silence. Bright screen reflecting my own calm face back at me. Then I saw it. One missed call, one voicemail. The number belonged to my bank. I pressed play. 4:44 p.m., San Antonio, Texas. The parking lot shimmered with heat. I sat in my car with the engine off, groceries still unpaid for inside. The voicemail paused halfway through. The late sun pressed against the windshield, turning the dashboard warm beneath my hands. Around me, engines started, doors closed. Life moved on with the efficiency of people who hadn't just been stopped mid-step. I replayed the message from the beginning. "Ms. Bennett, this is a courtesy call regarding a temporary restriction placed on your account." Courtesy, temporary, words chosen to sound harmless. I listened without interruption, the way I always did when something felt wrong. The explanation was vague, unusual activity, review in progress, for your protection, no mention of dates, no amounts, no signature required, just an assurance that someone else was handling it. "Handling it," I repeated silently. I looked at my hands resting on the steering wheel. They were steady. They had signed papers, balanced ledgers, folded letters that changed the course of years. Embarrassment still lingered from the checkout line, but beneath it was something quieter and heavier certainty. This wasn't an accident. Accidents come with apologies. I dialed the number back. It rang. Then hold music filled the car, tinny and cheerful, wildly out of place. As I waited, I watched heat ripple above the asphalt and thought about timing, about how freezes don't happen without authorization, about how someone had decided I wouldn't notice right away. The call disconnected. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. All right, I thought. Now I'm listening. I started the engine and drove home, groceries forgotten, my mind already moving through drawers and folders I hadn't opened in years. Whatever had been paused wasn't money. It was access. And access once taken is never taken by accident. 6:02 a.m., Hill Country, Texas. Memory wakes before the sun. Long before debit cards and hold music, my mornings began with paper ledgers and quiet coffee. I married young and learned early that comfort is fragile if it isn't planned for. My husband believed in steady work. I believed in steady records. Between us, we built something that didn't shine, but lasted. We bought land no one wanted yet. Small interests, long leases, things that needed patience instead of praise. While friends chased promotions and new trucks, we folded receipts, reviewed clauses, and asked questions that made rooms uncomfortable. I learned to read contracts the way some people read faces, slowly, watching for what was missing. When he passed, the world expected me to simplify, to sell, to step back. Instead, responsibility sharpened my focus. I kept everything in order, titles filed, accounts separated, contingencies noted. I trusted institutions, but I never relied on them without documentation. Trust is a courtesy, not a substitute. Over the years, my life looked modest by choice. Same routines, same purse, same calm answers. People mistook that for limitation. I let them. There is safety in being underestimated, especially for a woman my age. Wealth handled correctly doesn't announce itself. It layers. It waits. By the time banks started replacing tellers with screens, my structures were already quiet and durable. I had advisors who listened and accounts designed to survive scrutiny without explanation. Nothing flashy, nothing careless. So when my card failed at a grocery store decades later, the feeling wasn't panic, it was recognition. Because systems don't freeze accounts without a reason, and reasons, I had learned, always leave a paper trail. 10:19 a.m., Central Texas. Confidence wears a pressed suit. Mark Whitmore entered my life the way most authority does. Calm voice, firm handshake, credentials spoken just quickly enough to sound impressive. He was introduced as someone who could simplify things, a senior account manager, experienced, reassuring, the kind of man who believed efficiency was the same as wisdom. At first he spoke carefully, asked polite questions, complimented my organization. "You're very thorough," he said once, smiling as if it were a quaint habit. I noted the way his eyes skimmed documents instead of reading them. Speed can masquerade as competence, but it rarely replaces it. The red flags weren't loud, they arrived as assumptions. Mark began summarizing instead of explaining. "Standard procedure," he'd say, tapping a page without naming it. When I asked for details, his answers grew smoother, shorter. "No need to worry about that," he'd add. "We've already handled it." Handled. The word returned often. He liked control dressed as concern, suggested consolidations I hadn't requested, temporary holds framed as protection. He spoke about risk the way people do when they want agreement without discussion. "You don't need to understand every part," his tone implied. "That's what I'm here for." I watched how he spoke over small pauses, how he filled silence quickly, as if quiet made him uneasy. I let him talk. Silence has a way of inviting people to reveal themselves. Once, when I declined a recommendation, his smile thinned, just slightly. "You should trust the process," he said, firmer now. I nodded, not in agreement, but acknowledgement. Because trust isn't requested that way, and anyone who rushes reassurance usually needs it more than they admit. By the time my card was frozen, Mark already believed he understood me. That assumption would cost him dearly. 1:42 p.m., Central Texas. The first betrayal sounds like policy. The explanation arrived hours later, neat and rehearsed. Mark called just after lunch, his voice calm in the way people sound when they believe they're untouchable. There was an automated review, he said. Routine, nothing personal. I could hear typing in the background, keys clicking with practiced confidence. An automated review doesn't freeze someone's access without notice, I replied. My tone stayed even. Facts don't need volume. He paused just long enough to recalibrate. These things happen, he said. We flagged some irregular activity out of caution. Caution. Another word that sounds kind until it costs you dignity. I asked what activity. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he summarized. Large movements, complex accounts. It raised questions. Questions that no one had asked me. Decisions that had already been made. I wasn't informed, I said. We didn't want to alarm you, Mark replied smoothly. The freeze is temporary, for your protection. Protection, delivered after the damage. I stood in my kitchen while he spoke, the grocery bags still on the counter, frozen items slowly softening. The refrigerator hummed steadily, indifferent. I noticed my hands were calm. That surprised me. What access was restricted, I asked. Just the debit card, he said quickly. Everything else is secure. Secure meant unreachable. Secure meant controlled. I asked for a timeline. He offered reassurance instead. Trust me, he said. We'll resolve this quietly. Quietly. The words settled heavy in my chest. I ended the call politely and sat at the table without moving. The betrayal wasn't the freeze itself. It was the confidence with which he believed he could decide my limits without explanation. I reached for my phone and opened my account history slowly. No warnings, no alerts, just absence. That's when I understood. This wasn't a mistake. It was a test. 4:09 p.m., Central Texas. Control tightens without permission. The second betrayal arrived before sunset, layered beneath courtesy. An email followed Mark's call, polished, branded, addressed to me by my full name. It thanked me for my patience and confirmed that temporary restrictions had been placed on select services pending review. The language was clean, impersonal, designed to close questions before they formed. I read it twice, then a third time. Select services, no list, no scope, no end date. I called the number at the bottom and waited through soft music that looped without urgency. When a representative answered, she spoke kindly, the way people do when they're trained to absorb discomfort without owning it. I see the note, she said. Your relationship manager is handling it. I am the relationship, I replied gently. She hesitated. I'll escalate, she said, already typing. Minutes later, another voice came on the line, measured, authoritative, unfamiliar. For compliance reasons, he said, we can't discuss internal triggers. Triggers. Another word meant to end conversation. Your accounts remain intact, he added. Access is simply limited. By whom? I asked. By protocol, he said. I thanked him and hung up. Outside, the late afternoon heat pressed against the windows, cicadas buzzing as if nothing had changed. Inside, something had. I opened my laptop and began checking what I could still reach. Statements loaded slowly. Certain tabs didn't open at all. Permissions had shifted quietly. My name remained on the accounts, but authority had been rerouted. I felt no panic, only a narrowing focus. This is coordination, I thought, not caution. I pulled a folder from the drawer and set it beside my bag. The weight of it felt familiar, steadying. They believed restriction would make me ask. They were wrong. It made me verify. 6:22 p.m., Central Texas. The line is crossed. The third betrayal didn't come with a phone call. It arrived as silence. By early evening, alerts began to stack on my screen: failed authorizations, delayed transfers, a notice that certain features were unavailable until further review. No explanation, no signature, just a quiet wall where access used to be. I drove to the branch before they closed. The parking lot still radiated heat, the air heavy with dust and cut grass. Inside, the lights were too bright, the counters wiped clean as if order itself could explain decisions. A young teller recognized my name and froze, then smiled too quickly. "One moment," she said, already signaling someone behind the glass. Mark appeared a minute later, jacket on, voice smooth. "We're just being careful," he said, as if caution were a favor. There were indicators. "Indicators of what?" I asked. He lowered his voice. "Unusual patterns. It's best if you wait this out." Wait. The word settled heavily. Waiting is what you ask of people you believe won't move. "My funds are intact," I said. "Why am I restricted?" He glanced at a screen I couldn't see. "Temporary controls," he replied. "Standard." "Standard for whom?" I asked. He smiled again, thin this time. "These processes aren't designed for discussion." That was the moment clarity stopped negotiating. Not anger, not fear, recognition. My authority hadn't been paused. It had been bypassed, decisions made about me, not with me. I nodded once. "Thank you," I said, and turned toward the door. Outside, the sky darkened, cicadas rising in chorus. I sat in my car and rested my hands on my bag. Inside, the folder pressed back solid, patient. This wasn't a mistake. It was a test. And I was done being measured by someone else's ruler. 8:41 p.m., Central Texas, after the doors close. The house was quiet when I got home, the kind of quiet that doesn't ask questions. I set my keys in their bowl and stood for a moment, listening to the ceiling fan hum its steady circle. No calls came. No explanations followed me through the door. Silence had chosen its side. I placed my bag on the kitchen table and poured a glass of water. The first sip tasted clean, grounding. This isn't shock, I thought. This is confirmation. I opened the bag slowly and removed the folder. The papers were exactly where I'd left them, aligned, dated, complete. Years of records don't panic when access disappears. They wait. I ran my thumb along a tab and felt my breathing settle. What had been frozen was convenience, not control. At the counter, I wrote a short list on a yellow pad. Times, notices, names, the phrases Mark had used. Temporary, standard, words meant to smooth over something sharp. Each line felt like restoring balance rather than preparing a fight. Quiet doesn't mean passive, it means precise. Outside, the night pressed warm against the windows. A truck passed on the road. Somewhere a dog barked once and went still. I slid the folder back into the bag and set it by the door, ready for morning, not for confrontation, but for accuracy. They believed inconvenience would make me retreat. They believed restriction would make me grateful for scraps of access. They misunderstood restraint. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the dark a moment longer than usual. Preparation doesn't raise its voice, I reminded myself. It tightens bolts. It checks records. It proceeds. Tomorrow, I wouldn't ask for access back. I would establish it. 9:12 a.m., Central Texas. Preparation has a rhythm. Morning arrived without apology, the sun already warm against the curtains. I dressed the way I always did. Comfortable shoes, pressed blouse, my bag resting where I'd set it by the door. There's no need to look different, I thought. The truth already is. The office sat off a quiet service road, modest and unhurried. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. The man across the desk didn't interrupt. He waited. Silence does the sorting when you let it. I placed the folder between us and opened it slowly, page by page, letting years speak in order account structures, signatures, correspondence aligned by dates that didn't lie. He paused at one page longer than the rest. These accounts, he said carefully, are insulated properly. He looked up. And the freeze procedural, not lawful. I nodded once. No relief, just confirmation. We spoke in specifics, notices required, remedies available, the difference between access and authority. He explained timelines the way someone explains weather predictable if you understand patterns. I asked questions and received complete answers. Accuracy doesn't hurry, I reminded myself. Before I left, he closed the folder and slid it back to me. They may believe the restriction stands, he said, until challenged. It will be, I replied, in order. Outside, the heat met me immediately, honest and bright. I walked to my car unhurried, the folder secured, the city moving on as if nothing had changed. Preparation rarely looks dramatic from the outside. It looks like routine. As I started the engine, one thought settled cleanly into place. When access is denied without cause, records don't argue. They respond. 2:36 p.m., Central Texas. The turn tightens. By mid-afternoon, the heat pressed heavier, the kind that makes small decisions feel larger than they are. I parked across from the bank branch I'd used for years. Same brick facade, same flags snapping in the breeze. Inside, the air conditioning hummed too loudly, as if trying to mask something. I waited my turn without checking my phone. When my name was called, the teller's smile arrived first, then thinned. "There's a restriction," she said softly, eyes flicking to her screen. "It should clear soon." Soon is a word that buys time. "I'll need the notice," I replied, calm even. She hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into the back. A few minutes later, a man in a tailored jacket approached, confidence worn like a badge. Mark Whitmore. He didn't sit. "Mrs. Bennett," he began, voice smooth, "this is a routine compliance review for your protection. Protection is what people say when they're closing doors." "For my protection," I repeated gently, without notice. He smiled as if we shared an understanding. "These things happen." I placed my phone on the counter and slid a single page, forward time-stamped, precise. "They don't," I said, "when procedures are followed." Mark glanced down, then back up. The hum grew louder. "You'll need to wait," he said. "Our legal team is involved." So is mine, I replied. His smile stalled just a fraction. Enough. A printer whirred behind the counter. A teller looked up, then away. The branch felt smaller now, attention tightening like a knot. Mark cleared his throat. "We'll be in touch," he said, stepping back. I gathered my things and turned toward the door. As it closed behind me, my phone vibrated once, then again. A message preview flashed, formal and urgent. I didn't open it yet. Some turns are best taken standing still. 3:02 p.m., Central Texas. When paper answers back. I sat in my car with the engine off, heat ticking softly from the hood. The message waited on my phone like a held breath. I opened it carefully. Not an apology, not an explanation. A notice formal, clipped, urgent requesting immediate confirmation of account authority and beneficial ownership. So that's the door they chose, I thought. I didn't drive away. I dialed one number, then another. My voice stayed even as I asked for the conference bridge and the time-stamped file. Years of preparation do that. They keep your tone steady when rooms begin to tilt. Back inside the branch, a small conference room filled quickly. Mark Whitmore returned with two others, all smiles arranged, pens aligned. A screen lit up at the far end of the table. "We'll need to verify," Mark began, already reaching for language that softened edges. "You will," I said, placing a folder between us, "and you'll record it." The documents moved in order trust instruments, signature authorities, asset schedules that didn't hurry. The screen changed, lines highlighted, dates stacked. A silence grew that no one tried to fill. One of the attorneys leaned forward. "Mrs. Bennett," she said carefully, "these holdings, these aren't typical." "They're deliberate," I replied. Mark's pen stopped moving. "There must be a misunderstanding," he offered, voice thinner now. "There isn't," I said. "And the freeze?" The attorney glanced at the screen again. "It appears," she said, choosing each word, "that the restriction was applied without proper cause. Exposure is significant." The room shifted, not loudly, not all at once. Chairs adjusted, eyes recalibrated. Authority found its place. "Lift the restriction," I said. It wasn't a request. They did. And as confirmations chimed across the screen, I understood the truth of it. Money doesn't need to announce itself. Paper does that just fine. 4:11 p.m., Central Texas, when the room turns outward. The lobby was busier than before. Late afternoon light spilled through the tall glass, catching dust in the air like quiet witnesses. Phones buzzed. Shoes crossed the tile with purpose. I stood at the edge of it all while the conference room door opened behind me. Mark followed, posture corrected, smile practiced but unused. He cleared his throat. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, louder than necessary, "we'd like to clarify a few things." "Of course," I replied, not raising my voice. "Public is where clarity belongs." A branch manager joined us, eyes flicking between faces. "There's been a procedural correction," she announced, careful and complete. "Account access has been restored. Additionally, internal review protocols are now in effect." A pause. People slowed. A few looks turned our way. Mark tried again. "This was never personal," he said, palms open. "Just routine safeguards." "Safeguards require notice," I answered, "and cause." The manager nodded once, relieved to anchor to something solid. "We regret the inconvenience, Mrs. Bennett." I didn't nod back. Regret isn't necessary, I said. Accuracy is. Behind us a printer hummed to life, receipts printed. A teller approached with a tablet, hesitated, then addressed me directly. Would you like printed confirmations or digital? Both, I said. Mark stepped aside as if to help, then stopped himself. The movement was small, but the change was complete. Conversations resumed around us, quieter now, calibrated. The bank learned where to look. As I walked toward the exit, the automatic doors opened without hurry. Outside, the heat pressed in, honest and familiar. I breathed once, steady. There was no victory speech, no apology demanded, just the record set straight publicly, precisely, and without raising my voice. Some corrections don't echo. They settle. 5:06 p.m., Central Texas, when authority loses its echo. Mark didn't leave right away. He hovered near the service desk, phone in hand, posture stiff with purpose that no longer knew where to go. The lobby moved around him, customers finishing transactions, tellers calling the next number, doors opening and closing with steady indifference. Where his confidence once carried weight, it now waited for permission. I watched from a bench near the window, my purse resting beside me. A compliance officer approached Mark, voice low, measured. He nodded too often. A second manager joined them, tablet angled away from view. Language shifted review, temporary restriction, pending audit. Words that pause momentum, words that mean someone is listening now. A teller crossed the lobby toward me. Mrs. Bennett, she said softly, your accounts are fully accessible. We've placed priority flags to prevent future disruptions. She smiled professional, sincere. I thanked her and stood. Behind me, Mark glanced over once, then looked down. The practiced smile never returned. Power, when unsupported, folds inward. It doesn't argue. It recalculates. By the time I reached the doors, an internal email chimed across the floor-soft pings, synchronized. Schedules changed. Authority rerouted. A small sign went up at the desk. Manager temporarily unavailable. Temporary can last a long time when trust is involved. Outside, the parking lot shimmered with heat. I paused beneath the awning, letting the air settle my breathing. I felt no satisfaction in watching consequences arrive, only balance restored to a system that had tipped too easily. What had been assumed was now examined. What had been rushed was now slowed, and what had been taken for granted was now recorded. I started my car and pulled into traffic, the bank shrinking in the mirror. Some downfalls don't make noise. They change who gets answered. 7:32 p.m., Central Texas, when the body finally exhales. Home felt different that evening, not larger, not brighter, just quieter in a way that didn't ask anything of me. I set my purse on the kitchen table and stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cicadas outside. Ordinary noises, steady and reliable. I poured a glass of water and sat down, hands resting flat on the table. Only then did I notice how tired I was, not from the day itself, but from the weeks before it. The careful watching, the restraint, the decision to wait instead of react. This is what letting go feels like, I thought. Not relief exactly, release. I opened my purse and checked its contents by habit. Phone, keys, a folded receipt from the grocery store, everything in its place. The card lay there quietly, no longer a point of uncertainty. It was just a tool again, not a test. I thought about Mark not with anger, but with distance. Some people confuse access with ownership. Others confuse position with authority. I had spent too many years correcting those assumptions silently to be surprised by them now. I walked to the window and watched the last light fade over the yard. Texas evenings have a way of settling slowly, heat easing into calm. I breathed in, deep and steady, and felt something return to where it belonged. Dignity doesn't need an audience. Security doesn't need permission. And peace, real peace, arrives only after the noise has nowhere left to stand. That night, I slept without replaying conversations or preparing explanations. Morning could come when it was ready. So could I. 6:11 a.m., Central Texas. Morning without permission. Morning arrived quietly, the way it always does when it doesn't need approval. Pale light slipped through the kitchen window and settled on the table where my purse rested, exactly where I had left it. I made coffee and stood there a moment, listening to the house wake up around me. Pipes warming, floorboards stretching, the day assembling itself piece by piece. Nothing in my life looked different. Same mug, same chair, same card in my wallet. But the weight of uncertainty was gone, and that changes how a person breathes. I realized I hadn't rehearsed a conversation in my head all night. I hadn't prepared an explanation. There was nothing left to defend. I thought about how easily institutions confuse quiet people for compliant ones, how often restraint is mistaken for weakness. Over the years, I learned something Texas teaches well. Strength doesn't shout across a room. It stands its ground and lets others move around it. The bank froze my card because they thought I wouldn't question it. They froze it because they assumed I had nowhere else to stand. What they didn't understand was that my life had been built slowly, deliberately, accounts layered, records kept, decisions made long before anyone noticed me at a checkout counter. I picked up my purse and felt its familiar weight. It didn't carry victory. It carried continuity, the kind that lasts. Before stepping outside, I paused at the door and let one last thought settle, calm and certain. Never mistake silence for surrender. Never confuse modesty with lack. Some of us don't raise our voices because we don't need to. When preparation finally speaks, it doesn't argue. It simply stands, and the world adjusts.